So our topic for tonight is birth to adulthood, the spiritual formation of 0 to 25 years old. Just a little bit about me. Um, oh, sorry. My name is David, and I always say that my life kind of goal, vision, and kind of purpose that God has given me is to know, to be known, and to make known God, self, and others. And we'll get into a little bit of that as to why that's important a little bit later. I was born in Costa Rica, so my first language was actually Spanish. My second language was Chinese. Both my parents were born and raised in Taiwan, but they moved to Costa Rica before I was born. In 1995, our family moved to the United States, where I grew up in Southern California, in Orange County. And in 2023, I got married. This is my wife, Haley. And some of the things that I like to do for fun is I like to cook, I like to play golf, and I also enjoy board games. Some of my experience in terms of why I like this topic, why this is a passion of mine. So I did my undergraduate studies at Davis. My degree on my diploma says English, but in reality, my degree was probably more in practical ministries. I spent a lot of time in our college fellowship, and I was able to go to seminary to study pastoral care and counseling. And my emphasis was really on kind of narrative therapy, as well as attachment theory. And a lot of those words may not mean anything to you, but we'll kind of unpack that a little bit. In terms of my professional experience, from 2016 to 2019, I was a youth pastor in a predominantly Chinese speaking church. And then from 2019 to 2024, I was a college pastor at Davis. And then most recently, a little over a year ago, I came on staff at Christ Community Church in Milpitas as the Connections pastor. So that's just a little bit about me. Like I said, tonight our topic is going to be on spiritual formation and birth to adulthood. For some people, the term spiritual formation is kind of a hard term to define. And honestly, if you were to do your own research on spiritual formation, you can read many books on spiritual formation, and the definition of spiritual formation can be quite varied. There's no real uh, um, official definition of that term. But a way that I think is helpful for us to start our conversation, and a helpful way I think to understand spiritual formation is as we think about the process of the Holy Spirit's work on our life, what is that process like? And what is kind of the main goal of the Holy Spirit within our life? And so I wanted to start our time together by just reading a passage from First John. And so we're going to be in First John chapter 4, verses 7 to 19. And so I apologize if the font is a little bit small on the slide, but I will read it for us. And so again, this is the book of First John chapter 4, verses 7 through 19. It says, "Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. And everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. And this is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. So, dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. For no one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. And this is how we know that we live in him and he in us. He has given us of his Spirit, and we have seen and testify that the Father has sent his Son to be the Savior of the world. If anyone acknowledges that Jesus is the Son of God, God lives in them and they in God. And so we know and rely on the love of God, on the love God has for us. For God is love. And whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in them. So this is how love is made complete among us, so that we will have confidence on the day of judgment. In this world, we are all like Jesus. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. And the one who fears is not made perfect in love. So we love because he first loved us. And so as we read in this, as we read in this text, it begins kind of with this instruction. John is writing to an early church there that is struggling with early church heresy called Gnosticism. I'm not going to get into that, but basically, what the Gnostics believed was that all the physical things of the world were evil, and the only good things were the spiritual things. And what John is doing here is he's trying to say that God created all of it and it all has to be integrated. And so he talks really a lot about love, and we'll see that love becomes kind of the measurement that John suggests as to our relationship to God. So this is his instruction. Let us love one another, for love comes from God, right? So in other places we read that all good things come from God, but in this case, we're really focusing on love. And everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. And so, again, as John is writing to the early church, one of the things that they were trying to fight with was, how do we know God? How do we know God truly? And here, John says, whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. So John actually presents a case in which there's a practical way to measure our knowledge of God, and the measurement is love. And so he continues that this is love. So if you're having this question, like, okay, if we're going to measure um, our knowledge of God based on this measurement of love, what does that look like? And he says, this is love. It's not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. And this is kind of interesting, because what John here is saying is, this is love. And then he uses a negative example. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us. And so John here begins by presenting the fact that we have love is not something that is initiated by us first. It's initiated by God first. He models that love for us through his son, Jesus Christ. But there's still a commandment here. There is still something that we are instructed to do, right? So it begins with God's modeling love, and then the invitation of, dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. So it's a response to the model of love that God has given to us. He continues, for no one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. This is how we know that we live in him and he in us, and he has given us of his spirit. So when we think about that term spiritual formation, what we will be talking about today, really what we're trying to say is, how does a individual from ages 0 to 25 grow in not only their knowledge of God as represented by how they love, but how do we make sure that as the Spirit forms us to be people that love well? Like, what is that process like? What are some of the challenges that happen that make us not love well? So that's kind of where we'll be going tonight. And again, I think something that tonight we're going to really be focusing on is, we have to make sure we don't turn the idea of spiritual formation into a human effort. And so sometimes when people talk about spiritual formation, they think like, am I signing up for a personal trainer program? I just have to follow some spiritual workout plan and I'll just get really, really strong spiritual muscles. There are definitely practical things to do, but the thing about spiritual formation is it is a work that is initiated completely by God first. The Spirit is at work. And so again, God is love. So the fact that we're attaining to God, or attaining to love, again, is something that's God. Is it a relationship? It is not a fixed target that we're trying to meet. And whoever lives in love lives in God and God in them. So again, our ability to love is simply a measurement of our nearness to God. But it is not a way necessarily to get to God, because again, he initiates that first. Um, and again, and ending with the fact that we love because he first loved us. So I know I've used a lot of this text and it's kind of confusing. Like, okay, so God loves us first, but then we're called to love, but then he loves us first, but then we're called to love, and it feels like it's back and forth, back and forth. So what does this all look like? And I think a helpful way to begin our conversation, especially as we're narrowing down to the ages of 0 to 25, is we have to think about like what is a person? Like how is a person formed? What are the components required to be a person? And so this is just a helpful framework that I think that we'll discuss. By the way, this is kind of the structure for tonight. We'll be talking about the framework, which is going to be head, heart, hands. We're going to be talking about the power of interdependent relationships, and we'll define kind of what interdependent relationships mean. And then we'll be talking about some practical tips for fostering healthy spiritual formation across all of those life stages. So again, what does it mean to be human, right? So in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4 is a famous passage, especially if you grew up in a Jewish household. This was probably one of the first things you memorized in the Torah. It's called the Shema, which is love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And again, as we looked at First John, he was really trying to combat Gnosticism. And so here, kind of in the Shema, there's these kind of components that are highlighted. There's the head, and I know it says heart there, but the reason for that is because in Jewish philosophy, the heart was actually the thought center of the person. And so I know the my slide says head, and then it's highlighted heart, but conceptually, our Western use of the word head more aligns with their use of heart. Um, and then there's the heart, which again, the Jewish philosophy would kind of this idea of the soul, and then hands are strength. So another way to think about this is head is how a person thinks, heart is how a person feels, and hands is what a person does. Now, usually we think, okay, how does people function? We tend to think people have an idea, and then their idea informs how they feel, and how they feel will result in what they do. And so oftentimes, our world tends to create plans using this model, right? They say if someone gets a good education, that good education will transform how they feel about the world around them, and it should help them do the right thing, right? And so that's why we deeply value education. And while that is true to some level, the actual formation of a person happens in the reverse. What I mean by that is from ages, well, it says 0 to 10. It should really say 0 to 5. From ages 0 to 5, a child is developing their hands. The child does not have a intellectual framework of the world. The child does not have the baby does not have like an emotional vocabulary, right? If you look at a 1 year old, the 1 year old would not be able to tell you that they feel sad, right? The 1 year old would not be able to tell you that they feel happy or anxious or things like that. But what a 1 year old can do is the 1 year old can say, can experience the world like bright lights, color, noise, taste, sound, right? So they're really experiencing the world in a physical way. Um, and from 5 to 15, they're learning their heart language. They're learning their emotions, right? So a 10-year-old, if they steal a cookie, um, and you were to ask them, why did you steal a cookie? The 10-year-old does not have the language to tell you the cookie cost $3. I didn't have $3, and so my options were A, to steal the cookie, B, to not eat the cookie, C, whatever. And then he cannot give you a logical reasoning. But what the 10-year-old is able to say is, I felt hungry. And so in engaging the physical world, I took the cookie. And from 15 to 25 years old, they are developing their head. So they're developing how they think about the world, right? And so oftentimes you think of a college student or a young adult from 18 to 25. Their brains are kind of like sponges for theories of the world, or even later high school aged students. They love thinking about how the world. And so, really, how a person functions is the cycle goes both ways. Sometimes what you do also affects how you feel, which then affects how you think, and then how you think affects how you feel, which then affects what you do. Now, along the way, sometimes certain muscles are more developed and some are underdeveloped. And so, for kids who did not have a healthy upbringing in terms of the physical world around them, they actually end up having behavioral issues later on in life. And so, there's a lot of research done on how physical trauma, especially for young babies, actually affects them later into life in terms of their behavior. And likewise, if a 10-year-old is experiencing a lot of emotional hurt and does not process that well, that could really kind of impact their ability to emotionally regulate. And likewise, if a 15 to 25-year-old is not receiving a good quality of kind of cognitive reasoning, that can also have a negative impact on their development kind of as a person moving forward. Okay. And so, really, the way I like to think about this is taken together, the head, the heart, the hands really forms the soul of the person or the spirit of the person, right? And we interact with the world around us kind of in our head, in our heart, and in our hands. And so, what God invites us to do is we take our whole selves and we go into relationships with other people. And we also bring our whole selves and we have relationship with God. And God and other people obviously have a relationship with each other, but that part of the triangle we are not as involved with. But since we are bringing our whole selves into these relationships, when hurt or dysfunction happens in any of these areas, whether it's the hand, the heart, or the head, we actually end up bringing some of those dysfunctions into the relationships that we carry. Um, so the question then becomes, well, how does damage happen, basically? How does damage in the head and the heart and the hands happen? Like, what is the role of parenting? What is the role of a good, healthy community? What is the role of my kids' school in their role of formation, right? These are all super important questions. And it's obviously a very complicated subject, and I don't want to make it seem like I've solved it or, there's some secret code out there. But again, I think this is just a helpful way to begin thinking about this issue. And so we're going to take a look using a different framework. So have this idea kind of in the back of your mind. And then we're going to take a look at another framework that is going to help you see how do we know how does something form in a healthy way, and how does something kind of get disrupted in the formation. And so I'm going to have us read don't know where this marks came from, but it's okay. I'm going to have us read 1 John 15, which is a fairly popular Bible verse. I'm sure many of you have read it. And this is, just for context, this is towards the end of Jesus's life here on earth. This is right before his crucifixion. And between John chapter 13 and John chapter 17 is when Jesus invites the disciples into this kind of private moment in which he teaches the disciples again right before his crucifixion. So this is a very intimate, very close moment that Jesus is sharing with his disciples. And right in the middle of that, Jesus kind of shares these words with the disciples in John chapter 15. He tells the disciples this: I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. So remain in me as I also remain in you. For no branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. For I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. But if you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. For such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. For as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. So now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. So my command is this: love each other as I have loved you. And so again, this is a very popular verse. And as we read some of this, like this idea of like, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. And if you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers, right? As we read this, it kind of sounds like, okay, so we can't bear fruit unless we depend on God, right? And so there's this strong idea of dependence on God. But at the same time, the text seems to tell you to remain in God. So there is something that we have to do. So there's this tension of, is this, to what degree is God working? To what degree are we working? And so even in the formation of our development, it's not just completely like, do we just kind of throw our hands in the air and it's just like, if God makes us healthy head, heart, hands, then that's what it is, and there's nothing we can do. It doesn't seem that simple. It seems like there is this dynamic where we have to depend on God for sure, but there's also this independence where there is something that we have to do. And so in the independence, again, there are these commands. If you remain, right? So that seems like a decision that an individual can make, that they will bear, right? That again, that there is a fruitfulness to the vine, that the vine is kind of accountable. And again, if you do not. So all of these are kind of things that seem to have this tension of dependence on God and self-will independence from God. What I'm going to argue tonight is that a healthy development is actually looking like interdependence. That the whole thing taken as a whole is not about, am I dependent from or am I independent from, but rather is there like a healthy ecosystem of togetherness, right? Sometimes I think we like to make things too clean and clear, and sometimes things are a little bit difficult. But I will say this: there is a pattern, there is kind of a healthy rhythm, and the rhythm does tend to follow dependence on God first, and then God empowers you to be independent. And as there's a healthy flow, it can look like interdependence. So I know a lot of these are words, so sometimes I think graphics are helpful. And so this is kind of what it looks like. God um, has all of us born into a family originally. We learn these categories of dependence and independence. And so a healthy ecosystem, right? If we have, let's say a child is born into a family, from 0 to 5, the child has no choice but to be dependent on the family, right? We do not take a 1-year-old and tell them to hunt for their own food or to get a job to pay for their own food, right? We all understand that a baby or a toddler or a child requires complete dependence on the family in order to survive. That is a very normal, natural thing, right? And as the child develops and becomes a teenager, becomes a young adult, becomes a college student, we understand that there are certain aspects of independence that we have to give them to become a healthy whole person. And so as they go from this kind of process of dependence to independence, they then get launched into the world, right? God calls us to go out, and there's a certain calling and purpose that we have. And as they go into the world, they learn to form new relationships of dependence and independence, right? So and this cycle keeps going. We don't just go one rotation, right? So let's take a middle school child, for example. A middle school child, there are still some aspects in which they're learning dependence. They probably still need money for basic needs in their life in which they depend on their family for. But at the same time, they are starting to learn patterns of independence. So for some kids, they learn to do their own laundry, or maybe they start walking to school. there's an expectation that they should know how to do their own homework. And as they go to school, they enter into the world and they start to form friendships in which they learn dependence among other people, their teachers. We learn structural and systemic dependence, things like we can trust churches, we can trust police officers, different things like that. There's kind of the systemic dependence. And as they navigate the world, right? So again, let's think of the middle school child. As he's in school, there's even certain aspects in which the school empowers a certain degree of independence from for the child. Maybe the school gives the child um, a leadership position, or maybe as the school is asking the child, what elective do you want to take? These are all decisions that we are empowering the child to make independently to kind of form who they are. Now, when everything is flowing smoothly and nicely, it's really beautiful and it's a really kind of wonderful thing. But all of us understand that life is not perfect, that there's certain damage that occurs not only in the family, but in the world. And so I want to kind of map that a little bit to see what that would look like and to see what kind of impacts that that may have on an individual. And so for some people, their pattern kind of looks like this, where their family of origin maybe overemphasized dependence, right? Another way that I like to think about that dynamic of dependence and independence is in, especially for kids, dependence is kind of like my last name, Ding, whereas independence is David, right? So when I'm a child, I'm learning dependence. I'm learning what does it mean to be a ding. And as I get opportunities to grow, I then learn what does it mean to be David. And a healthy whole person is David Ding. But sometimes when families overemphasize dependence, the ding becomes bigger than the David. And this is kind of what we're looking at here. And so when dependence is overemphasized, what ends up happening is you compromise the independence. And so the child, when they are told that there are more things that they have to depend on the parent for, so for example, some kids, um, they don't get the independence to choose what they want to do. For some kids, they are told that the choices that they want to make are wrong and that they need to overly rely on the parent for certain decisions. And by the way, what we're not talking about here is like issues of sin, right? So obviously, we're talking about things that are just kind of choices that God gives us independence for. So, anyways, so if a child grows up in a family system where dependence is overemphasized, what ends up happening is that they go into the world also with those tools. And so they tend to then overemphasize dependence on the world. So they will care more about what their friends think of them. They will care more about what their teachers think of them. They will just be leaning towards dependence. Now, um, if I were to be honest, uh, right now in our society, we have a lot of situations where young adults seem to not be able to launch into adulthood. And I think this is a problem that we see across society. And part of the reason is because I think generationally, this is the most common family pattern. And so kids, as they become in their mid 20s, maybe even later 20s, mid 30s, they struggle to launch because the only skill they learned how to make was to depend on other people, and they have no idea how to grow in independence. And so this again can affect the head, heart, or hands, right? So if a parent is overemphasizing dependence, for example, in the hands, for a teenager, for example, they might tell the teenager they can't choose um, like which socks to wear. Like you have to wear these socks, right? And so the child kind of has this idea like, oh, I can't even pick the socks I want to wear without the permission of other people, right? Some heart dependence might be you tell the child that they have to feel a certain way, that there's a right way and a wrong way to feel. And then so the child doesn't doesn't have the ability to formulate their own feelings, right? In terms of the head, you tell people, you tell them, you know, this is the only right way to think, this is the only wrong way to think. And again, I do want to emphasize here, we're not talking about issues of right and wrong, right? That's very important to hold, right? But what we are talking about is giving kids the opportunity to experience a little bit of independence, which, by the way, will probably require some degree of failure. And so, as people who have been given the opportunity to participate in the formation of an individual, we have to have a little bit of tolerance for failure, right? Obviously, we don't want a kid to get hurt. So, there's a degree to which we would be concerned with how close a kid gets to fire. But if a kid gets a little close to a campfire at a safe distance just to feel the warmth, there is a healthy exploration to that's okay. Now, at the other end of this is some family systems focus on independence. So um, parents might say, I'm not going to tell you anything is right and wrong. You have to just discover that on your own. So for kids that grow up in this kind of system, they enter the world and they really don't know what to depend on. They really feel kind of lonely and isolated and disconnected. And they really experience a lot of anxiety because they're just kind of on their own, right? Now, so a lot of the things that I talked about this system, you can kind of reverse it. And at extreme levels, so at both extremes, right? So at this extreme and at this extreme, the words we tend to use, because most people's lives are not like perfect. And so some of us have a little bit of this or a little bit of that, but there are some people who experience it on the extreme end, right? And so a kid who experiences extreme independence and literally just has never had an opportunity to depend on anyone, what we tend to say is that this is a child of neglect. And so, kids of neglect, the story that they are told about life is that you literally are on your own, that there's nobody you can trust, and that yeah, you just have to figure out. So, for example, if a kid is experiencing this, like their faith journey is going to be very complicated because when you talk about things like trusting in God, like how can they even trust in God when they can't even trust their parents and they can't even trust their friends, right? It's going to be extremely difficult. On the flip side, at the extreme end of dependence, we tend to call this abuse. Now, I know that that's a loaded word, but really, when we think about the term abuse, really what we're trying to say is what an abusive relationship is one person in power telling you that you cannot do anything, you cannot be anyone without their permission. So really, people of abuse are told to just completely depend on their abuser. And so again, sometimes kids are experience this situation. And again, sometimes they enter into the world and they end up repeating other abusive relationships because again, that's all they know. We again tend to model the love that was shown to us, right? And so again, thinking back to that First John passage, how we love because God first loved us. A lot of the healing process is allowing the love of God to orient us back to a healthy interdependence. But even as I explain this, and I don't know, it'll be interesting when we get into the question and answer time to how much I communicated this well. But even this is a little bit too simple, right? Because the reality is most of our lives kind of look like this. It's just kind of a mess. Like in certain relationships, there's high dependence. In certain relationships, there's interdependence. We go into the world and it's just kind of a messy, 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 messy place. And so, what is our goal as either parents, as uncles and aunts, as a church, as maybe you're a teacher and you work at a school and you interact with a lot of students? Like, what is your role as a teacher in the midst of all of this? It's to try to model and create a healthy interdependent systems across all areas of their life. And you hope, because again, it's a cycle, they keep going, as they engage in the healthy modeling over time, they get shaped closer and closer and closer to health. And so I wanted to just spend some time going over practical tips because I know a lot of the things I talked about was very kind of theoretical and you might be asking like, okay, well, what do I do with this information? Or maybe you have a child who's like 25 and you're like, is this all over? Like, how do we kind of navigate this, right? So there is hope, right? We believe in a God of hope, and so there is hope. And so I did want to spend some time just thinking through what are some practical applications that we can think through using these frameworks. So again, like I said earlier, we have to model love. And we're again defining love as kind of that healthy interdependent system across their thinking, across their feelings, and across their behavior. And so to model a healthy love for a 0 to 5-year-old really has to do with their physical safety, right? And so we want to think about their physical safety across all things, not only their own physical safety, but again, because we're modeling love, you also have to be safe, right? And so I know sometimes I've only been married a little over 2 years, and so I'm not an expert in marriage, but I'm sure that in most marriages, conflict tends to happen and disagreements can occur. And I think sometimes if you have a baby and you think, well, the baby has no cognitive language abilities, they can't understand our argument. So it's okay to argue in front of the baby. Again, life happens. There's no judgment here. And so I'm really just kind of presenting the best case. I would encourage you to not display kind of um, strong emotions around babies because babies are highly intuitive to your emotional state. If you have some time, you can YouTube an experiment called the still face experiment. And so what the still face experiment was they brought a mother and a child, like a 1 or 2-year-old child, and the mom was sitting in a lab, and they were given the instruction to play with the child. And in the lab, in the corner of the room, there was a little light. And when the light went on, the mother was given the instruction to just show no affection, completely emotionally disconnect from the child, and to just have a still face with the baby. And if you look up the videos, you'll get to see how the baby reacts to the physical disconnect of the mother. And what ends up happening is the baby first recognizes something is wrong. And so the baby starts to act in bigger ways to try to get the attention of the mom to like, hey, let's reconnect. Something is wrong. The baby is trying to fix it, even at a very young age. And when the mom still just does not reconnect with the baby has nothing to do but to cry. And so really what the still face experiment was trying to do was trying to show that yeah, again, babies are highly intuitive to the emotional centers of their caregivers, right? And if you want to get into kind of more research on this, there's these things called mirror neurons in your brain that are really cool. But unless you guys want to know more about that, you can ask that in the questions later. But yes, again, babies are highly intuitive. And there's little things that we can think about, right? So I know in seminary, one of the things my professor encouraged young parents to do was to not wear any jewelry that could cause you harm, right? Because let's say you're wearing a earring and the baby is just physically exploring the world, the baby might pull your earring and it might hurt you. And when it hurts you, you're going to have a pained expression, and the baby can actually pick up on your pain signals. And so, little things like that. But again, I want to emphasize these are practical tips to model healthy love. It does not mean if you wore jewelry when you had a baby, you were like an evil parent and now your child is ruined for the rest of their life because this one moment, like that's not how this works. But we're just again trying to create as many environments and systems to foster health. Because the reality is we live in a broken world and life is hard enough. So we want to try to make it as easy as possible for healthy development. But there is no perfect development. That's part of the reason why we desperately need Jesus in our life. All right. So moving on, how do you model love from a child from 5 to 10? It's really about giving them an emotional vocabulary. And so we want to make sure that maybe around dinner time, maybe around times of hanging out, just checking in with the child of saying, hey, how are you feeling? And if the child does not know how they're feeling, the way to model love through dependence is actually giving them the emotional tools to answer that question. You know, you can say, do you feel sad? And kind of explain what sadness feels like. Are you excited? And describe what excitement feels like. And the independence skill that you want to give them to develop their heart is actually to allow them to feel how they feel and not for you to try to make them feel a certain way. So maybe you take them on a family vacation and you worked really hard to plan this family vacation. You know, my friends laugh at me because I hate Disneyland. And the reason I hate Disneyland, if any of you have ever gone before, you'll know that this is true. There's always these large families that go to Disneyland, and they spend so much energy to take their families to Disneyland. They get like matching shirts, and you can tell like they spent so much money to bring their family there. And so it's maybe like a family of 8, 10, grandma, grandpa are there, everyone's there. And what you see is like mom and dad are tired from like driving to Disneyland, of like grandma and grandpa are tired from waiting in the sun. But you know that grandma, grandpa, dad, and mom are willing to be at Disneyland because they want the kid to just have a good experience. And then you look at the kid, and the kid is tired, and the kid is complaining. And now mom and dad are angry at the kid for complaining for this wonderful experience. Grandma and grandpa don't know what to do, right? So it's all this kind of distress and like, you know, so I don't like Disneyland for that reason. Because it's very easy for the parents to want to judge how the parent how the kid feels because of how much it costs the parents, right? And so sometimes your kids are going to feel things that you just don't agree with. And but if you try to correct that immediately, what you are actually communicating is you need me to tell you how to feel. Um, and if you don't care about their emotions at all, what you are communicating to them is if you feel something, I am not someone you can trust to tell that information to. And so there needs to be both. You need to give them tools in terms of how to feel, but you also need to let them feel and to let them just make those choices. And sometimes, you know, if they tell you they feel something and you don't like how they feel, it's okay for you to share how you feel, but just not in a way that is trying to force them to feel how you feel, right? We want to make sure we're not trying to take people and just make them mini versions of ourselves. Um, for ages 10 to 25, in terms of head, how do you model love? Having good, healthy conversations is a good way to model love through dependence, right? Again, the dinner time is such a wonderful time for development. Whether, again, this doesn't matter whether or not your parents, whether or not you're a youth pastor, even just like if you're at church and you see a high school kid, just asking them questions like, oh, what did you think about the sermon today? Or what are you learning in school? To invite them to use their head is a healthy way to do that. And again, the independent way to love them is to allow them to explore, allow them to have some bad ideas, right? It's okay for them to have some bad ideas, and you can just kind of like laugh about it, ask them more questions. Now, obviously, if their bad ideas are dangerous, then you want to make sure to voice your concern, and to let them know kind of what your concerns are. That's perfectly fine. So that's how you kind of model love across those three domains and across those three life stages. Another way you want to help foster, especially the dependence side of things, is again creating safety and boundaries. And so, in terms of the hands, what are the safety and boundaries of is really just like having a safe house, making sure if they go to like a friend's house that that's safe, right? So it's just really that physical safety and physical boundaries. But you also, in terms of their emotions, you again want to just create safe environments for them to share how they feel. By the way, ages 5 to 10, this is where bullying at school takes a really big impact. And so if you have a child or if you know a child who is getting bullied at school around the ages of 5 and 10, it is doing tremendous amounts of damage to kind of their emotional state and being. And that's something that we definitely want to be concerned about. And then kind of a dependence on the head is you want to just make sure that people have good opportunities to have good access to information. And so whether that's making sure that and not only good access to information, but good environments to ask questions is also really important. And you also want to make sure that they have a variety of sources of dependence, a variety of sources of information, because that also helps them depend on multiple things, which is ultimately going to help them as they launch into the world. You also want to embrace risk and failure. I kind of talked about this a little bit earlier. People are going to make mistakes, right? All of us in this room have made mistakes. There are decisions we've all made that we wish we didn't make. But that being said, those decisions that we regret, those decisions that we failed in, those things do not define us. We are still beloved by God. We are still here, right? And sure, maybe because of some of those poor decisions, it created some effects that you didn't like, but ultimately, it is not this kind of eternal damnation that we experience because of those mistakes and failure, right? Um, and so for babies, right, it's okay for them to go outside and play in the yard. Yes, might they trip and fall? That's a possibility, but that's okay, right? It's okay. Even, I know we don't like it when people like break bones, and that's obviously not a good thing, but a broken bone is probably not going to be a thing that defines their life. It's probably just going to be something that they talk about, when they're 20 among their friends, like, hey, this one time I broke my bone outside playing in the yard, right? In terms of risk and failure within the heart, right? To allow kids to explore how they feel and to not be threatened by how they feel. Some of your kids, some of the kids in your life who are in this age might have some emotions that are very strange, right? So a good example of this is sometimes if you see, usually they're boys, usually these kind of preteen or teenage boys, they will hang out together. And if you're just watching them hang out, you'll see one boy randomly just like punch another boy. And it didn't seem like they were fighting. It just seemed like he was bored and he just like punched another kid. And you're like, what? Why did you do that? Right? And then you go and talk to the boy, and the boy's like, I don't know why I did that. And what you find out is the boy was just bored. And and part of what the boy was exploring with his heart was, I'm bored and I don't like feeling bored, so I needed to do something to change that. And I know if I punch this kid, that would change it, right? And so that's actually a good opportunity as they take that step of independence to explore. You can say like, "Hey, I understand that, but maybe what you were feeling was this kind of distress about boredom, and it expressed itself in a different way." And so it becomes a good opportunity that as they explore their feelings and they act on them, again, the dependence is going back and processing those emotions with those 5 to 10 year olds. And the other thing I forgot to mention, just because I'm using like ages 0 to 5 for hands and ages 5 to 10 for heart and ages 10 to 25 for head, it doesn't mean that like 10-year-olds no longer need help with their hands or 25-year-olds no longer need help with their hearts. It's an ongoing process, but those age numbers are just usually when the initial development occurs for those areas. Um, yeah, and again, independence for head is allowing kids to question. I know in the church world, a lot of times, especially in youth ministry, we tend to panic when kids have doubts about their faith or questions about their faith. And I just want to say, I think it's a healthy thing for people to have doubts and questions, especially at this age, because they're asking questions about everything in life. And so, we want to give them an environment where we tell them, hey, it's okay to ask these questions. It's like God is not scared of your questions. Like as a community, we do not fear your doubts. We actually welcome them. And it's okay to feel, to think what you think. But let us also share what we think and let's have a conversation. Let's create that interdependence together. And there's a healthy ecosystem of, hey, you depend on me, I give you independence. I depend on you, and you give me a certain amount of independence, right? And that'll create kind of this healthy relational model, which then allows them to also experience things kind of like what we talked about in First John chapter 4, where they can now love because they were first loved, right? And so this is really what we're doing. Finally, um, what does interdependence actually look like? When everything is said and done, the real sign of healthy interdependence is, does the individual feel like at any point in their journey they can come home and rest? Right? No matter what has happened, no matter what failure has occurred, no matter what they feel, is there a place in which they can return and rest? And as individuals who have the opportunity to walk with youth, with babies, with young adults, we always want to make sure that we communicate, hey, no matter where you are, this is a safe place for you to navigate life. And so as we do that, we can really become a place in which people can form in healthy ways, and to really just grow in that way. I'd like to just kind of end this portion of our time just sharing a little story. Um, so I had a friend, and I was his small group leader for a time. Now, this particular friend, he was part of the foster system. So his parents, unfortunately, were drug addicts, and the state took him into custody and was put into the foster system. So initially, this friend was really kind of told that the world is not a safe place. A lot of initial trauma in his life. The foster family that took him in was very rigid, right? So if we were to use this map, he grew up kind of in this situation. His birth parents really neglected him. He had no, and then he went into a family that was kind of more like this. Dad was ex-military, kind of gave him a lot of structure, but gave him a lot of, discipline, things like that. And so for a kid to go from here to here is a big adjustment. Okay. And so what ended up happening is there was a lot of tension in his foster family for obvious reasons. But his foster parents really tried hard to love him well, and I believe they did a good job. But what ends up happening is as he became a young adult and as he turned 18, he really started to try to fight the dependence because again, this is what he was used to. This is what he was comfortable with. So unfortunately, he made some poor mistakes, and actually ended up going to jail, and was in jail for about 6 years, and came back out of jail and had nowhere to go. And so he decided maybe I will go back to my foster family to see if they will let me come back home. The foster family was really kind of struggling. The trust was really broken in that relationship. But at the end of the day, the foster family said, "Hey, we're going to let you come home." Right? So they allowed him to come home and rest. But the foster family made sure there were certain boundaries and certain expectations. They were clear about what they wanted to do. But my friend, as he was able to come home and rest, and there's multiple other things that happened, he actually ended up reconnecting with his foster family in a much healthier way. And so now he still helps out with his foster family. He's now like 26 or 27 now. And he's moved out of home and he works in Tennessee and is really, really doing quite well for himself. But the reason I want to share that story is even in the midst of really tragic, really extremely bad circumstances, like I said earlier, there is hope. And so if we make sure that everyone understands, like, hey, there is a place for you to come home and rest, that plus the power of the Holy Spirit, plus the work of God is adequate to help people form themselves in a healthy and positive way. And it is my hope and prayer, and it is my life's mission, I think, to try to make sure that this is what healthy churches look like. That we make sure that we communicate with everybody, no matter how old you are, that, hey, the church is a place in which you can come home, find rest, find love. And again, no matter what has happened, that there is a healthy place for you to learn interdependence and for you to experience the power of God. And so that's really all I had in terms of my presentation. I know I tried my best to package it in a way, and this is a very big topic. But yeah, if there's any questions you guys have or comments, feel free to write them in the
Bianca,
chat, or I
can
don't
I
know how
ask a
Bianca
question
wants to do it.
directly, or
Yeah,
rather than
yeah,
typing?
yeah, yeah.
Hi,
Yeah,
Pastor David. Thank you for the sharing. I really appreciate that. And I, well, the question I want to ask is, in the realm of, say, Sunday school program in the church, how would what kind of advice or tips in regard to, say, designing a curriculum that
Yeah.
based on those age ranges that, I mean, the three ranges you supplied, that we could, provide us some like practical tips.
Yeah. Good question. Yeah, so for Sunday school curriculum, the traditional Sunday school model is really effective for the head, right? The way that traditional curriculum is written. So definitely like middle school, late high school, college, young adults, you giving them a healthy and good amount of biblical knowledge and theology is important, right? For your 5-year-old class, I know it's sometimes cute to but I do think telling them the Bible stories is an important part of that, because what stories do is it gives them kind of, it opens up their world to options, and curiosity is extremely important for 0 and 5, but also just the physical play is very important. So if I were training our 0 to 5-year-old team, maybe our nursery team, um, I would really try to emphasize to our nursery team, like, hey, your job matters, right? So this is not a time for you to just like throw the kid in the corner and only give them attention if they're crying. Like, you're not there just to like babysit necessarily. Like like your 1 hour or 1.5 hour, whatever time frame you have with that 2-year-old child, even though you may not be able to have a whole conversation with them, that physical safety, physical love, right, is communicating. It is something that needs to happen. And so I do think sometimes within our nursery programs, we tend to just say like we almost view it as like a second thought, afterthought. We just say like, okay, well, you guys go take care of them, whatever. But I do think that's a missed opportunity. For that 5 to 10-year-old, for the heart formation, right? Really kind of sharing a Bible story and really asking them how they felt about the Bible story and to explore their emotions, right? And there's this other tool that I like to use called a feelings wheel. And so it's 3 concentric circles with a lot of feelings word. Now, unfortunately, I'm only aware of a feelings wheel in English. I tried to look up one in Chinese. I think one of our coworkers actually made one, so I think Bianca might have access to it and she can share that. So allowing kids to kind of express, right? So even the Bible stories, if you talk about Jesus healing the paralytic, Like, oh, how did that, if you were the paralytic, how would you feel? If you were Jesus, how would you feel about the paralytic, right? Um, but really, I think for the 5 to 10-year-old, as you're developing their heart, it would not really be the time to go into kind of like the theory of things. You're really not trying to answer the question why for 5 to 10-year-olds because they really don't have the language for that at the moment. That's not to say it's not important. It's just to say that they're not there yet. And so I would really frame the Sunday school curriculum kind of around those things. So I think a lot of the curriculum that we have is perfectly fine for the head development, but I think sometimes the heart and hand development gets overlooked.
Yeah, thank you so much, David. And talking about the emotion education, how to feel, to tell about the feelings, maybe the parents needs to be educated first. How do you
Yeah,
think about that,
yeah,
especially in the Chinese culture?
yeah. I realized I promised I would use Chinese in the Q&A. So
You don't have to.
yeah. Yeah, we can only lead where we've been, right? And so sometimes if you've not been there before, we don't call that leading. We call that like blindly going, right? And so if and what you actually see here is actually how generations affect each generation. Because a lot of times I think, especially like people my age in their mid late 20s, mid late 30s and 40s, there's this growing trend, and I'm sure if any of you in this room have a child around my age, you might have had this experience where kids growing up in the US will start blaming their parents for like, oh, you overparented me, or you and there's this kind of growing trend in saying that. And what I just want to say is, even though there are aspects of that that are probably true, the other component of this is as parents, you were probably just doing your best with the tools that your parents gave you. And your parents were doing the best that they could with the tools that your grandparents gave them, right? And so in Exodus, we read how, how sin passes through generation. And sin doesn't necessarily mean like adultery or murder, right? Sin can also just mean things that are broken. And so brokenness tends to pass from generation to generation. And so if you come from a family of origin that just did not have a lot of emotional language and emotional vocabulary, it does not mean like you're a bad person and you failed, but it does mean that within your family system, that was an underdeveloped muscle. And so we want to just be self-aware of that and to do that. And so and that can be across all three. It's not just emotions. Like if your family of origin did not have a lot of physical safety, you want to make sure. So for example, like I think like in my family, like going to the gym and working out was not a value I saw my parents do. So I, so for me, a big struggle is taking care of my physical health as an adult because it was never modeled for me. Now, thankfully, in my marriage, my wife's family, that was a big value. And so again, as I go back into the circle, now my new family being with my wife, there is a redemptive aspect to that. So even though I'm 35, I'm like learning as a 5-year-old how to take care of my body. But again, there's hope that God is still in it. And so again, yeah, but good point. We can't lead to where we haven't gone. So
Yeah, thank you, David. So we have some questions in the chat. Okay, I'll read it for you.
Okay.
In Chinese.
Yeah.
Okay. 刚才有听到说，现在的年轻人在独立性上比较困难，那我们要怎么样去引导他们？
Yeah. 大部分的时候，年轻人对这个独立困难，是因为他们长大当中没有这个机会，所以现在大了以后，你要重新再一次跟他们说，其实你有一些机会要自己做一些选择。那要看 程度是多少？当然有一些人，像有一些现在有一些20几岁、30几岁的人，有很多各种各样的问题。像我认识一些人，连起床都是一个问题。那所以要看程度是在哪里。那不管程度在哪里，你需要鼓励他们做一些决定。他们需要练习做决定的这个 muscle。所以有时候比如说我朋友如果起床都是问题，他们吃饭算一个选择。那连他们吃饭这个选择，虽然对我们来讲是很基本的，其实是一件事情，我们应该鼓励他们。所以比如说今天他们决定了吃东西，其实很好啊，就继续鼓励他们做这些决定。那慢慢一步一步来。可是当然，如果你是父母或者你是一个朋友，这个过程大概会很长的时间。那我们希望他们明天就好了。可是，大部分的时间是不是那么快了。对
陪伴的过程很艰辛的。
对对
Yeah.
对。
Okay, another question. 青少年的问题是不是都是原生家庭导致的？如果改变不了家庭模式，仅仅靠学习一些知识或者尝试一些实践，I think she means techniques，可以改变他们的心理问题吗？
所以像我们刚刚讲了，这改变当中最重要是圣灵在做这个工作。那我们当人可以配合圣灵的工作，可是开始这个工作全部是圣灵的在做。所以我们可以有信心说神爱我们的孩子，神有在工作。那我们要祷告要看说怎么配合圣灵的工作。所以有的时候是他们成长当中的一些问题，有的时候是他们本身有一些问题。比如说如果他们心理上有一些问题，比如有可能他们真的是就有 like depression or anxiety 或者一些mental health 的一些问题。这不是说谁的错，这只是说他们像有的人得癌症或者生病，这只是我们的世界都broken world。所以就有时候是本身这些问题。所以呃不是说只是一件事或只是另外一件事。其实这些很复杂，然后全部都可能。对。
呀，像每一个具体的人，可能都有很多具体的问题。OK，有两个问题是 in English，Can you read
Okay,
them?
okay.
Yeah.
So I'll do Christine's question. I'm a youth minister in a Chinese church, and I'm not an ABC. So some of my high schoolers are starting to feel shaken in their faith because of things they hear at school and in the news. I want to talk with them, but I can't always respond quickly. How can I start these conversations in a good way? Yeah. Um, so first, just my heart goes out to you. I know what it's like to be a youth minister in a Chinese church, and you're coming at it from a different context. So that must be an extra layer of challenge. And so thank you for doing that. And it's true. High schoolers, they are starting to feel shaken and having doubts. And if they're going to school, a lot of the messages, especially what they get about Christianity, is how bad Christianity is, or the hypocrisy of the church and different things like that. Now, I think what I would encourage you to do, which I feel like you're probably already doing, and the reason I say you're probably already doing it, because it sounds like your students are sharing these questions with you. The fact that they're sharing these questions with you, what that shows is they want to explore their head with you. They're having these thoughts and they're inviting you into that space. And that shows you're a safe person, and that's wonderful. And so I would try to hold the tension of their doubts while introducing biblical truth. And so you're not telling them, here is biblical truth and pick one or the other is not what you're doing. But what you are doing is you may be thinking this, your school may be telling you this, your friends may be telling you this. This is kind of what Jesus says. And the independence that you are encouraging to do is, okay, there's a narrative of your life that the world is telling you. There is a narrative of your life that your parents are telling you. And this is what Jesus's narrative of your life is. And the independent choice you get to make is, which narrative are you going to live into? And part of this is going to be exploration. Sometimes they're going to pick what the world says, and sometimes they're going to pick what their friends say. And I would say, as a youth minister, you don't want to panic, because as soon as you panic, that'll communicate to the parents that they have to panic. It'll communicate to the church that they have to panic. And then suddenly the lines start to get drawn and it becomes a war. It's okay for people to explore. It's okay for people to, and so, yeah, I encourage you, continue to just have these conversations. It's not about necessarily just like giving them the right answer and hoping that that'll work. It's really just being in the journey of exploring with them, which again sounds like is exactly what you're doing. So thank you for doing that. This is Fan's question. The Church Awana program 3rd to 5th grade group kids have behaviors such as disrespecting the speaker, talking loud, eating snacks during the lecture time. How do you balance discipline and having a good time at church? Yeah, there's obviously going to be different ideas around this. And so I'll just share what I think. But I want to leave space that other perhaps more qualified people than me would probably say something different. But I would say 3rd to 5th grade. Now, 5th and 6th grade are difficult. The reason 5th and 6th grade are difficult is because depending on the developmental stage of the child, you're kind of in a cross section. So some 5th and 6th graders who are developing faster than their friends are kind of in a place where they're ready to absorb like information, whereas their friends who are a little bit slower in development are not. And so 5th and 6th grade is hard because you get a room of 30 kids and like 10 of them are more mature than the 20 kids, and you have one teacher trying to account for both kids. It's just a very difficult age to do that. I would say you want to communicate clearly to the kids in this group when is fun and when is kind of focus time. And when you communicate those boundaries, you as the leader want to fully commit to both of those times. So the fun time, you need to also fully commit to then being fun. You need to participate in the fun, encourage the fun, make it actually fun. Sometimes I find in church programming, especially for children's ministry, we think of the fun time as the carrot and the lesson time as the stick. Okay. And so we tend to say, if you allow us to hit you with the stick, we will give you the carrot. That is a terrible model of discipleship, because what you are telling the child is, if you tolerate Jesus, you will get something, right? We do not want to do that, right? So we want to make sure that the fun time is fully fun. So we do want to be strategic in how we think about the fun time. We want to be strategic in how we think about the snacks. We want to be strategic in terms of how we think about the games, because that matters. Because if you have a well-constructed fun time plus a well-constructed learning time, what you are then communicating is God loves you in both. God loves you as we're playing this silly game. God loves you as you're eating your snack. And God loves you as we read the Bible, right? And so I would say, yeah, make sure that the times are clearly, and then also for 3rd and 5th grade, I know this, I don't know how you feel about this, but we want to be mindful of their attention spans too. So if you have 1 hour, I think the lesson time at most can be like 15 minutes, I think, for a third to 5th grader. And so we want to be mindful of attention spans as well. So yeah, thank you, Fan.
然后我刚刚觉得你讲的这个胡萝卜加大棒 这个的确是我们很多的做法。呀，好，大家还有别的问题吗？如果你觉得不合适，我们回头在这个编辑的时候可以把你的问题把它 cut 掉，也都可以的。如果你觉得有 privacy 的问题的话，做教会的 children minister 真的很不容易。Yeah, youth pastor also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
因为这个当 children 或 youth pastor 问题不只是说怎么支持孩子，也是怎么支持父母。因为
No. 所以 David 现在你是做 connection pastor.
嗯哼。
So would you like to talk something about that? Yeah, because
Oh,
我们
okay.
谈到了 children and also parents and
Yeah,
church. Yeah.
yeah, 所以我们教会我的 title 是 Connection Pastor。那有很多人会问说这到底是什么？那这是很好的问题，因为有时候我也不太知道。可是基本上，我们的想法是每一个人在教会应该是有一个可以成长的地方，可以不但是互相认识，可是怎么去认识神。所以很多我们今天讨论的怎么造成这些interpersonal relationships，其实我的工作是怎么让我们的教会可以更像这样。所以不管你在哪里，你来到我们教会，你的 head, heart, hands 都有一个地方可以 experience dependence, independence。那对孩子来讲，跟 youth 来讲，那当然就只是跟我们的 children's ministry, children's pastor，互相讨论怎么这样做，跟 youth 那一个全部的系统可以这样。
Yeah, 所以当你讲到说 dependence and independence 的时候，实际上我们脑海里面的图像已经是说，它既有连接 connection，有 support，同时我们又尊重它是一个独立的个体。
嗯哼。
Right，那么我们在这个平衡当中怎么来寻求？比如说，我能够说，有一个健康的界限，但是同
Yeah,
时我也能够给他犯错的空间。
yeah. 所
要
以
take the risk，这个
，yeah,
balance，要
yeah.
where to draw
所
the
以，所
boundary。
以教会像我们刚刚是两个圈圈，上面的圈圈是 family，下面的圈圈是 world。其实我们可以画第三个圈圈是 church，right？所以 church 应该只是像 family 一样，我们不是希望说大家只在 church 里面，他们也需要回到他们的家庭，他们也需要出去到世界上。所以 failure 当中，当然在教会 fail 其实是最安全。
嗯哼，
可是我们也需要让他们知道，你可以出去教会，你可以回你的家庭，然后你如果 fail 的话，然后世界不接受你，你的家庭不接受你，你还是可以回来。You can come home and rest。你可以回来到教会，我们可以当这个 healthy interpersonal or interdependent relationship. Yeah.
嗯哼，Home of God。
Yeah. One more question from Fan. I think, how to support church kids' friendship? There are kids that feel they belong and they have friends, and some that don't have good friends at church.
嗯
Some of their best friends are non-believers. Yeah. I would not be too worried if just because the kids have if their best friends are non-believers, I think that's okay. I think actually that helps them develop certain skills that actually will help them in the future in terms of how to engage with people outside the church. I do think what you're saying here is concerning and is a very real reality across every church I've ever been a part of or ever seen, that oftentimes kids will have their cool group and there will be kids outside of that cool group, right? Part of that is just human sin, right? We live in a broken world, and it would be unreasonable to expect just like our church kids are all the full embodiment of Jesus and can accept anyone and everyone. So this is where church leaders are very important. Because if your church only had church kids who were just the second coming of Jesus, then really we don't need youth leaders. We just throw all the good kids in a room and they'll be fine, right? And so really where youth leaders come in is as you notice these kids who are kind of on the outside and don't have a place of belonging, you actually learn, like, how do I become their friend? And even though they would probably hope that they could have a friend their age, which is ideal, but if that's just not the reality of your church, you might have to be that person. So, for example, in this particular time in my ministry, we're currently looking for a youth pastor and youth director. And so I'm stepping in for the interim time for our youth ministry. And so for our youth team, every event, one of our youth leaders, their entire responsibility is looking for the kids who are not connecting and making sure to spend time with them, to sit with them, to learn about them. And then as you identify student leaders, and I think I'm speaking more for youth, because with children, this is going to be a little bit harder. But with youth, as you identify student leaders, then you empower those students by giving them an opportunity for independence of saying, hey, this is your church. And so when kids come and they feel disconnected, don't you want this opportunity to practice this independence of building this relationship? And so on the youth end, we're trying multiple things. We have youth leaders that are constantly looking, and we're trying to empower other youth to do that. Now, I do think with older elementary school, earlier you said 3rd to 5th grade, if that's the age range we're talking about, I think it is possible to take a 3rd grader and, to find your 2 or 3 3rd graders that are a little bit more mature, and to say, hey, I see the maturity in you, and I feel like, God could powerfully use you by loving other kids. And so when little Johnny comes and he doesn't have a friend, would you be willing to be Johnny's friend? And sometimes kids, if you just tell them that, they like, oh, I didn't know. Like, I didn't, in their mind, they just go into their rhythm of like, I hang out with Tommy, not Jimmy, right? And so sometimes you just need to let the kids know. But again, I don't know what your particular church situation is. Maybe none of your kids are at that point, and that's very possible as well. But those are just some things that I might think about. Yeah.
Yeah，您好，我想问一个问题，戴维牧师，对，我想请教一下您，如果是教会的这个人数不多，然后呢，孩子也不多，您比方说，小学有那么3、4位，高中有那么3、4、5位哈，加起来一共可能就7、8个孩子，那教会也没有这种 youth ministry at all，所以我想请问一下您，如果如果您给一些建议的话，在这样的教会，您怎么样开始这样的一个施工？谢谢。
Yeah. 所以我长大的教会是蛮小的教会，我一个小中文教会，大概礼拜天大概40到50个人吧，50个人算蛮多的。那我跟我同年长大的大概只有2、3个孩子。那对我来讲，我们反正那时候教会就，如果你不想要去听人家讲道，他们就把我们放在一个房间，不管你多大，反正大家在一起，然后找一个姐姐或哥哥就看着他们，就是这样。其实虽然我们看这种情况，觉得哇，别的大教会又有这些 program，又有那些什么，其实也不是不可以。对，可是你就只是说，比如说这个大姐姐、大哥哥，他们也不是说需要很深的神学或怎么样。可是如果他们知道怎么爱这些孩子，其实也 OK 啦。那有的时候我觉得我们在教会系统上面，有时候会觉得说，哦，人家人家怎么做，我们要学人家怎么做。可是最重要是，神给了你这个教会，他要你怎么当你这个教会。 不是叫你去当别的教会。对，那这也是，比如说神给我的呼召是跟别人的呼召不一样，我不需要去追别人或学着怎么做别人。对，所以我觉得教会也是一样。所以虽然说教会不大，那年轻人也不多，其实我觉得最重要是圣灵在工作了。所以不是说大教会有圣灵，你小教会没圣灵，这不是这样。所以我觉得你祷告当中想到一些人，有没有可能问问他们愿不愿意试试看？那有的时候就只是大哥哥大姐姐，有的时候是呃，其实在，其其实我成长最重要的一个人是一个人叫尹奶奶。尹奶奶她也没有说教我们圣经或者什么，可是尹奶奶我很确定一件事，就是她每一天为我祷告。那虽然她也没有直接为我，可是我就知道哇，这个尹奶奶肯定是每一天就为大家祷告，所以我就很尊重这个尹奶奶。那透过他的见证，其实是对我很大的影响。所以我觉得，虽然我们讲这些东西有很多想法、很多系统、很多strategy，嗯，不是不是说神只能用这些东西，呃，成长人。
谢谢
谢谢。
小帅，你提的问题其实是蛮多北美的华人教会的问题呀。真正影响一个孩子的成长是爱，不是 program。和 David 又有一个问题，讲到新移民的问题呀。
Yeah. Okay. We have more kids from new immigrant families and don't speak English. They form their own group, and so for their parents, what do you suggest? Okay. So just so I understand the question, Shelley, there's now two youth groups, like one group that speaks, I'm assuming Chinese, and one group that speaks English. Is that right?
No, we have kids at the different ages. So
Okay.
they join the Sunday school at different ages, fourth grade, fifth grade, and they're supposed to go to youth. But we even set up a program for bridge for all these kids not able to fully speak English. So it put church a lot of manpower to running all this program. Also for the Sunday school teacher, they feel they have to spend the time to translate translate what she or he is teaching because they don't understand the language, the fully language. So it put how to say, for normal kids, they the kids grow up at church, they know the stories, right? So the teacher have to pay attention to the other some 2-3 kids don't speak English to explain or into Chinese. So it's a lot of effort on the teacher's part, right? So all the teacher have to speak bilingual.
Yeah.
And also for the bridge program. So what do you see church as necessary to create that the bridge program to save the gap? Or we should strongly recommend them to go to the youth program, Sunday school, the worship.
Sorry, one more question. What would you say is the average age of these youth or kids?
Say it again.
What is the average age of these kids?
We have all the ages.
Okay.
Yeah, from kindergarten to the youth. Suppose over 12, 13.
Yeah. So I'd split it into two things. So for youth, I would say like 13 years and up.
Yeah.
I would probably find your 3 or 4 students who are really good models for both groups. So the immigrant kids as well as the native kids. Find 3 or 2, or it doesn't matter how many, some of them. If you have a large church, 10 of them, right? If you have a smaller church, 1 or 2 of them, this is okay. But the main point is I would find 1 or 2 kids, if possible, and then get them in a room together and then the leader asks them, hey, this is kind of our problem, our issue. Do you guys as students have an idea of how we could solve this issue? And the reason I would start there is because if you are able to get buy-in from the students to start something, it's going to be much easier to help execute. Because otherwise we're kind of just guessing. Like we're just guessing what they need and guessing what they want, and it can be right. So I would say that for the youth. For the kids yeah, I think it is a lot of energy to just what you're describing. For kids, I would think like a bridge program would be nice. I would probably think through like what are the rhythms that you guys have? So like, could it be that do you have enough manpower to do a Chinese kids group and an English speaking kids group, and then do you maybe do like once a month everyone combined, or so I think there's creative ways to think through that, but I would have to know kind of more of your situation to really be helpful. But I think for youth, sometimes something we forget is we can just ask them for advice. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
In youth ministry, youth enjoyed more for different programs. Okay, how to encourage them to be more engaged in scripture learning? Should we do more deep or more on application of scriptures? Yeah, this is a common problem. So first, we have to just recognize that I think scriptural biblical literacy is decreasing, unfortunately. But that's kind of the reality of our society at the moment, right? So as we recognize that biblical literacy is decreasing, we have to understand that the baseline is also decreasing. And so I think we need to make sure that our expectations matches our reality. And so I think sometimes we tend to have expectations for our current youth using the expectations that we used to have. And what ends up happening is the gap is so big that it's really difficult for our youth to get there. So an example I like to use is one of our young adults. He does pole vaulting, which is they run with a stick and then they try to jump to clear that bar. It would be like if I was a pole vault coach and I set the bar way too high for my jumper. As the coach, I have the option to say, hey, that's a very easy height. Why can't you just jump it? But at some level, it's on the responsibility of the coach to make sure the bar is at an appropriate place where it is challenging enough that they are growing, but not so challenging where they can only fail, right? So on one hand, I would just reflect on making sure our expectations match. Now, if you are in a youth ministry context where truly the students that you have are at a concerning level of just avoidance of scripture, I would try to do some exploration as to how they feel about the youth ministry. Because what I have found is when there is high trust among the youth and the youth ministry, then they are more willing to jump and clear that bar. But when there is low trust and they feel like, if there's low trust, then for them it's like, I don't want, like, why should I listen to you? Like, and so yeah, so.
Yeah, so I mainly asking more for the general teaching, how to mainly more for the high school students. When we teach Bible, how we can get them to be more engaged. I think in general, I still feel the youth, they are eager to learn but sometimes I don't know, maybe our teaching are not deep enough that they feel is more repetitive. That's one side. The other side is whether they feel the scripture are not relevant to their life. And so my question is mainly based on your experience, which part, if we want to focus, can help them to be more engaged?
Yeah. Sorry, I misunderstood your question. So something that I do with our youth ministry every time we meet is I have a box at our welcome table, and the box is literally for them to ask any question that they want.
Okay.
And I will spend about 10-15 minutes at the beginning of our meeting just reading and answering those questions. And the reason I do that is, one, it actually helps me have a good measure as to what are these students thinking about? What are they wondering, right? And second, you're telling them, hey, we want to know what you think, and we want to talk about things that you think about. Right. So Fuller Seminary, they have a thing called the Youth Ministry Research Institute. That's not their name, but there's a research institute that's specific on youth ministry at Fuller Seminary. And so they released a book called Growing Young, which was kind of a study as to churches that are struggling with their younger generation and churches that are doing well with their younger generation. They were trying to figure out what are some markers. And they did some interviews with students from churches in struggling churches. And one of the common responses that they were giving was youth would say things like, I'm tired of the church answering questions that I'm not asking. Right. And so oftentimes just kind of getting that data of like, what is our kids thinking about? And then kind of thinking about our teaching time in that framework and helping them understand, hey, the Bible has a lot to say about the things that you're wondering about. Right. So for example, last week, I had one of the questions that someone wrote last week was, how do I forgive my bully? Right. And that's a very powerful moment because, one, they felt the courage to write that question in a question box that they knew would be read out loud. But it gave us an opportunity not only to give them the space to voice what's happening in their life, but it gave us an opportunity as a community to say, so that I could address, our 10th graders or 11th graders, like, hey, bullying really affects people. So if this is something you're doing, like, look at the impact that you have. And for those of you who are being bullied, we want to make sure we're communicating like, hey, we're a safe space, like, and then so we were able to have a good conversation around forgiveness. And even though I had a plan to do kind of a separate Bible study, we ended up just spending more time talking about forgiveness, which I think was just a much more valuable use of our time.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
然后我想 David 不只是说你很去倾听他们，其实你也有去 ask， 主动的去了解他们，conversations，right？